In the very first moments of Mkabayi Kajama's life, it seemed as though fate had already decreed she would never exist. She was born in the mid-18th century inside the Zulu royal court, together with a twin sister. But to the ancient Zulu, this was not a sacred blessing, it was a dreadful omen. According to long-held tradition, twins were seen as a sign of impending disaster, the wrath of the ancestors, and death hanging over the entire dynasty. The strict law demanded that one of the infants be killed immediately to ward off misfortune. In that instant of life and death, as fearful whispers spread through the royal household, King Jama, the father of the two children, made an unprecedented decision. He refused to kill either child. Instead of submitting to fear and cruel custom, Jama chose the opposite path. He kept them both. A choice born of paternal love, yet one heavy enough to alter the fate of the entire dynasty. From that moment, Mkabayi, the child who should have been discarded, grew up marked by the stigma of a surviving curse. Her childhood was anything but peaceful. Every glance carried suspicion. Every whisper carried the word misfortune. When her mother died, without producing a male heir, many took it as proof that the twin birth had indeed cursed the family. In their eyes, Mkabayi herself was the living evidence. She grew up shunned, branded as guilty from the moment of birth. Yet it was precisely that burden that forged a soul of iron. Instead of crumbling, Mkabayi learned to stand tall, to observe in silence, and to sharpen her intellect. Branded as nature's aberration, she swore to make her existence impossible to ignore. Where others saw a curse, she would prove that this curse could reshape an entire dynasty. The child who had once been condemned to die would become the sharpest political mind in Zulu history. And it all began from the moment her father dared to defy tradition. As King Jama grew old, a silent dread settled over the royal court. He had no son to succeed him. In a society where power could only pass to men, this was nothing less than a death sentence for the dynasty. No heir meant chaos, civil war, the collapse of the Zulu line. Whispers of fear echoed everywhere, while political rivals circled like vultures, waiting for their chance to strike. In that suffocating atmosphere, a teenage girl rose up to defy fate. It was Mkabayi. Still branded as the cursed child, still looked at with suspicion, but she understood clearly, if the dynasty collapsed, her own life would be meaningless. And so, while the powerful men sat powerless, Mkabayi seized the right to act. A reckless plan, unprecedented, began to form. She decided to find a new wife for her own father. It was such a bold step that if she failed, she could be denounced as arrogant, even treasonous. But Mkabayi did not care. She knew the survival of the royal line rested squarely on her young shoulders. With rare discernment, Mkabayi chose Matanase by a young woman of proper lineage, possessing both virtue and strength, capable of giving Jama a son. Astonishingly, the entire process of arranging, persuading, and orchestrating the marriage was carried out by Mkabayi herself, without any assistance. Still only a teenage princess, she acted like a seasoned strategist, maneuvering the royal household and the political stage with quiet precision. And then, the miracle came. From that union was born a Prince Zangakona. This child was not only Jama's son, but a living symbol of Mkabayi's foresight and resolve. His very name, meaning we have acted as we should, was a direct tribute to her. The entire people knew, without the girl once despised as an ill omen, the dynasty would already have perished. From one whispered to be a bringer of disaster, Mkabayi suddenly became the savior of the royal line. That daring act not only preserved the throne, it gave her the first taste of the intoxicating flavor of power. For the first time in Zulu history, a woman, more than that, a mere girl, proved that she could manipulate politics at a level no one dared imagine. From that moment, Mkabayi was no longer just a princess. She had become the guardian of the dynasty and, more dangerously, a woman who had discovered the true extent of her own power. In 1781, when King Jama died, the Zulu court plunged into mourning. The son whom Mkabayi had orchestrated into existence, Zangakona, was still only a boy, far too young to face the throne. The kingdom sank into crisis. A dynasty without a true ruler was nothing more than prey for circling enemies. Rival factions waited to strike, while the council of noblemen argued endlessly, unable to decide on a solution. And then, a voice broke the deadlock. It was not the voice of a seasoned chief, nor a battle-hardened commander. It was a princess. Barely in her 20s, Mkabayi stood before the council and declared, "I will rule in my brother's place, until he is old enough to rule for himself." The words fell like a blade cleaving through tradition. For as long as memory stretched, Zulu women were destined only for marriage, for childbirth, for obedience. No one had ever dared claim the title of regent, the supreme power reserved for men. The council chamber erupted, but instead of ridicule or outright rejection, silence fell. For everyone knew, if there was one person with the courage, the intellect, and the ruthlessness to guard the throne, it was Mkabayi. That decision changed everything. In an instant, the princess once despised as an omen became the first female regent in Zulu history. And once she held power, Mkabayi ruled not with gentleness or mercy, but with iron and blood. When a rival named Soji arose to challenge the legitimacy of the dynasty, Mkabayi did not hesitate. She deployed the army, crushed the rebellion without mercy, and sent a chilling message: anyone who dared threaten the throne would pay in blood. With that single act, she transformed herself from princess into sovereign, a ruler to be feared. But power did not rest on force alone. Mkabayi knew that in a patriarchal world, for a woman to maintain authority, she must sever every chain that could bind her. Thus she made a bold, life-altering choice: never to marry. No man would ever stand beside her as co-ruler or claim her achievements as his own. By remaining single for life, Mkabayi preserved absolute independence. Gradually, the court and the people were forced to accept her power transcended gender. Even in the praise poems of the time, she was granted titles reserved for men and acknowledgement that she no longer fit within the limits of womanhood. She was a ruler in every sense of the word. For nearly a decade, Mkabayi had been both a shield guarding the throne for her younger brother and a sword cutting down every enemy. A woman in a man's world, yet one before whom all were forced to bow. From then on, she was no longer merely the protector of the Zulu royal line, but had become the most powerful female political figure in South African history, the one who laid the foundation for the bloody games of power that would follow. In 1787, Nsingakona was finally old enough to take the throne. Mkabayi, the elder sister who had ruled in his place for so many years, formally handed over the crown before the entire royal council. But do not mistake this as her disappearance from politics. On the contrary, Mkabayi simply shifted her role from direct ruler to the shadow behind the throne, the advisor even a king had to respect. The throne may have rested in Nsingakakona's hands, but true power, the decisions, the calculations, the shaping of the kingdom's future still flowed through Mkabayi. She knew that strength did not lie only in the staff of command, but in the ability to control those who wielded it. From the shadows, she pulled strings, adjusted, and arranged, ensuring everything aligned with the interests of the Zulu dynasty she had sworn to protect. And then, a new name entered the story, bringing with it both opportunity and tragedy. Nandi, a proud, strong young woman, she had a relationship with King Nsingakona. The result was a child born outside of marriage, a scandal in Zulu society. At first the boy was named Sigidi, but the people mocked him with another name, Shaka, meaning stain, blemish. Shaka's birth ignited a storm. Nandi and her child were cast out by the royal court, forced into exile, condemned to humiliation and hunger. People mocked them, elders shook their heads. What future could a child without legitimate parentage possibly have? Yet amid the scorn and ridicule, one person saw something different. That person was Mkabayi. From a distance, she observed her rejected nephew. In the cold, sharp eyes of the woman once branded an ill omen, she saw an unusual fire burning in the boy. Shaka grew up in hardship, but every step he took was firm. Every glance carried an uncommon ferocity and intelligence. While the world saw only disgrace, Mkabayi saw a sword rough, abandoned, but if sharpened, capable of cutting through the destiny of a nation. Saint Zongakona, though seated on the throne, left little mark. His reign drifted by quietly, even forgettably, while his sister's shadow loomed ever large. Mkabayi continued to command her own military force, the Abakilusi homestead, and to act as strategist, the invisible hand guiding the court. Among the people a saying spread, "Go and ask Mkabayi," as though her word outweighed the king's decree. During those years, Mkabayi not only safeguarded her brother's throne, but also quietly kept watch over her distant nephew in exile. She knew the time would come when the dynasty would need a new flame, a warrior strong enough to ignite the entire nation. And when that moment arrived, the sword named Shaka would be drawn from its sheath. Mkabayi was not a woman guided by sentiment. She did not pity Nandi, nor cradle Shaka as a tender aunt, but in her coldness lay a vision few could grasp. She saw value where the world saw only shame. That was the eye of a true maker of dynasties. The throne may have belonged to Saint Zongakona, but in the shadows the entire kingdom revolved around Mkabayi's will. And as time passed, she patiently awaited the day when a bastard child would return, carrying a fate that would change everything. In 1816, when King Saint Zongakona died, the Zulu kingdom once again plunged into familiar chaos. The question of succession. By tradition, the crown rightfully belonged to Sigiyana, the king's legitimate son. The elders did not hesitate. This was the path of order, of law, of the ancestors' will. But in Mkabayi's cold eyes that had witnessed too much upheaval, Sigiyana was nothing more than a fragile shadow. She saw in the young man none of the steel, ruthlessness, or vision needed to guide a people facing trials of life and death. Meanwhile, in distant exile, another name rang loudly in her mind. Shaka, the boy once mocked as a stain, had now grown up amidst hardship and blood. Living among them Tethwa under Chief Dingaswayo, Shaka had not only survived, but thrived. He had become a renowned warrior, a military genius feared by enemies and admired by allies. Tales of his weapon innovations, his battle formations, his transformation of warriors into killing machines reached as far as the Zulu homeland. Mkabayi saw it all. She recognized in Shaka what Sigiyana could never possess, the relentless will and the talent of a conqueror. And so, once again, she chose to defy order. In a daring move, Mkabayi bypassed the rightful heir and selected an illegitimate nephew. She sent a secret message to Shaka, "Return, the throne awaits you." The decision was like pouring oil onto fire. News spread. The court buzzed. The elders were horrified. A woman, and not just any woman, but one openly backing a bastard son daring to defy the laws of the ancestors. Yet faced with Mkabayi's authority and her formidable influence, no one dared to oppose her openly. She had proven to many times that anyone standing in her way would be crushed. When Shaka returned with his seasoned warriors, Sigiyana scarcely had a chance. In the blink of an eye, the rightful heir was eliminated. Some accounts say he was assassinated the very night of his coronation, his blood soaking a throne still warm. And from the shadows of exile, Shaka Cass and Zongakona entered the royal kraal as the new Zulu king, thanks to the calculated hand of his infamous aunt. That moment changed Zulu forever, for Shaka was not merely a king. He was a storm, a volcano erupting, a force capable of transforming a small clan into a mighty empire. And it was Mkabayi who opened the door to unleash the storm, but the price of this choice was immense. She had broken tradition, sullied legitimacy, and turned regicide into a political tool. It was not only a strategic decision, but a gamble of life and death. If Shaka failed, the entire Zulu line would collapse, and Mkabayi would be cursed for eternity as a traitor. Yet she trusted her instincts, and her instincts were right. Shaka ascended the throne and immediately forged Zulu into the most formidable military power in southern Africa. The people saw victory. Enemies trembled at the name Zulu, but deep within the shadows of the throne, behind every triumph of Shaka, lingered the silhouette of a woman, the one who dared to wager an entire dynasty on a bastard child and won. This was Mkabayi's destiny-defining choice, to place the crown upon Shaka's head, and with it, to give the Zulu both a glorious future and a blood-soaked legacy. When Shaka Cass and Zangakona ascended the throne, the Zulu were no longer just a small clan among many warring lineages. Under his hand and beneath the calculating shadow of Mkabayi, they began to transform into an empire. In those first years, people said that Shaka and Mkabayi were like two blades sharpening against the same whetstone, one razor-sharp on the battlefield, the other cunning in the realm of politics. Shaka was a military genius. He revolutionized weaponry, turning the traditional spear into the ikawa, shorter, heavier, and designed for brutal close combat. He reorganized the army into disciplined regiments, built the famous bull's horn formation that encircled enemies from all sides. On the battlefield, Shaka was like a storm, spreading terror from the open grasslands to the mountains. But if Shaka was the storm, then Mkabayi was the rock that kept the throne steady against its fury. While he expanded borders with blood and steel, she ensured the kingdom did not collapse under the crushing weight of rapid change. With the Abakulusi homestead under her command, Mkabayi controlled her own loyal, battle-tested military force. It was her hidden hand that maintained order in the rear, extinguishing every ember of rebellion before it could flare. In the royal court, she controlled access to the king. Want to see Shaka? First, go through Mkabayi. Among the people a saying spread like a proverb. Banani Kumkabai, go and ask Mkabayi. And it was no mere rumor. Her word often carried more weight than the king's decree. For Shaka, the lord of war, still listened to his aunt, the silent architect of the throne. Together they formed a power that could not be stopped. Shaka conquered, Mkabayi ruled. One brought victories, the other turned victories into lasting systems of power. Every time Shaka returned with thousands of captives, it was Mkabayi who arranged their fates, transforming them into laborers, new warriors, or instruments to strengthen the state. Every time the battlefield demanded blood and steel, she ensured no voice of dissent dared rise at home. But this partnership was not always harmonious. Shaka, in his thirst for victory, sometimes went too far, and Mkabayi had to find ways to pull him back. They were like two poles of a blade, one sharp and dangerous, the other heavy and balancing. When united, the Zulu became the dominant power of southern Africa. But when that balance faltered, tragedy began to take shape. For a decade, Zulu expanded its borders, swallowing smaller clans, repelling stronger foes, becoming a kingdom whose very name made others tremble. The people praised Shaka as a superhuman warrior, but at the same time whispered that without Mkabayi, there would be no Shaka, for she had not only built the throne beneath him, but kept him from being consumed by his own power. It was the golden age, when aunt and nephew combined into a power duo unlike anything the Zulu had ever seen, a conqueror wielding fire and steel, and a strategist in the shadows keeping the flame alive. But absolute power always harbors danger, and then came the death of a woman, Shaka's mother, Nandi, that would shatter the fragile balance and drag the empire into a whirlwind of destruction. In 1827, Zulu's destiny turned down a dark path. Nandi, the mother once despised for bearing Shaka, yet also the one true anchor of his life, drew her final breath. To many, it was only the death of a queen mother, but to Shaka, it was the collapse of his entire world. The grief of losing his mother transformed Shaka from an invincible warrior into a man haunted by the ghost of sorrow. He could not endure the loss as any ordinary human might. He turned it into a national mourning, but one that exceeded all imagination, a collective madness enforced by blood and iron. Shaka decreed, no crops were to be planted for a year. Fields lay fallow, harvests abandoned, the people facing famine. He banned the drinking of milk, the staple of Zulu life. He ordered that any woman who became pregnant during mourning would be executed, along with her husband. In a fit of irrational rage, Shaka even commanded that cattle be slaughtered, so calves would know the pain of losing a mother as he felt with the loss of Nandi. These insane measures turned the kingdom into a vast prison where the private grief of one king became a death sentence for thousands. Some accounts claim that at Nandi's funeral alone, over 7,000 people were killed simply for not appearing sorrowful enough. The Zulu land shook beneath the weight of madness. From her place as closest advisor, Mkabayi witnessed it all. She looked at Shaka, the nephew she had chosen, the ruler she had built into greatness, and saw him transforming into a monster, destroying his own people. Every decree, every order was a dagger driven into the heart of the kingdom. And Mkabayi understood. The dynasty she had spent her life constructing now stood on the edge of collapse, not from external enemies, but from the very man upon the throne. In those dark days, an unbearable dilemma tore at Mkabayi. All her life she had been loyal to Zulu, not to any one individual, not even to Shaka. That principle had lifted her from being branded a curse to becoming the architect of kingship. But now, to preserve Zulu, she faced the harshest choice of her life: continue protecting Shaka, or depose him to save the people. It was not only a political decision, it was a betrayal written in blood. For Shaka was not only the king she had made, he was the boy in whom she had once glimpsed greatness, the outcast child she had bet everything upon. To kill Shaka was to destroy her greatest creation. Yet if she did not, Zulu itself would perish with him. Quietly, she began to calculate. And as many historians believe, it was Mkabayi's silence that gave permission for conspiracies to take root. Shaka's half-brothers, Dingaan and Mangana, long terrified of their violent elder brother, began plotting a coup. But they needed more than strength. They needed legitimacy, the approval of the one figure so powerful that none in Zulu dared challenge her, Mkabayi. When she did not forbid, when she remained silent, it meant her consent. And Mkabayi's silence became Shaka's death sentence. From here, Zulu's fate turned to a chapter drenched in blood. Shaka, the Midas king, the man who had forged an empire from a clan, was approaching his final days. And Mkabayi, who had made him, might now be the one to unmake him. By September 1828, Shaka's madness had brought the Zulu kingdom to exhaustion. Fields lay barren, the people starved, thousands were slain for trifles of grief. Fear spread everywhere. In the royal kraal of Kwadakuza, eyes avoided each other, breaths held. And the people whispered the dangerous question: was it time to end Shaka's reign? That question turned into conspiracy. Shaka's half-brothers Dingaan and Mangana, long resentful of their tyrannical sibling, quietly set their plan in motion. They knew that if Shaka continued, the Zulu line itself would be dragged into ruin. But to overthrow a legendary king, an undefeated warrior, was a deadly gamble. There was only one way to legitimize it: secure the consent of Mkabayi. The woman who had once raised Shaka to the throne now held the key to his fate. And when she did not protest, when she allowed the plotting to unfold, it was as though she had given her blessing. Shaka must die. The moment came when Shaka sent most of his soldiers on a northern campaign. Kwadakuza, the Zulu capital, was left with only a thin line of guards. King Shaka, drained after his fits of rage, often sat alone near the cattle kraal, silently watching the herd he so dearly loved. One afternoon, as the sun stretched its long shadow across the savannah, Dingaan and Mangana, along with a few conspirators, approached. It is said that Shaka was sitting on a large rock, unaware of the spears awaiting him. Suddenly, the short stabbing echo of the very weapon he himself had invented struck him. In an instant, the ruler who had once spread terror across Africa fell by the same weapon he had forged. Blood soaked into the grass, and Shaka's cry was drowned by the bellowing of the cattle. The death was swift, cruel, and bitterly ironic. The master of war betrayed and slain by his own disciples. His body was thrown into an abandoned grain pit. No royal funeral, no drums of farewell, a trivial ending for a legendary life. But in the shadows, Mkabayi's hand was still moving. She knew well, killing Shaka was only the beginning. Ensuring that the throne did not fall into chaos was the true mission. Dingaan and Mangana, the co-conspirators, both harbored ambition. One throne, two claimants. This meant civil war. For Mkabayi, that was unacceptable. Soon after, A secret order was given. Mngana, Shaka's killer and Dingane's accomplice, was quietly eliminated. People whispered that it was Mkabayi who gave the green light for the purge, clearing the path for Dingaan to seize the throne alone. Once again, she succeeded. From the shadows, she quelled disorder and erected a new king. Yet if Shaka would be remembered as a warrior, Mkabayi would be remembered as the ghost of the throne, the woman who created kings but also bathed her hands in their blood. To her, power was not a game but a duty, and to protect the Zulu line, she was willing to sacrifice anyone, even the legendary nephew she herself had placed on the throne. From that day on, the Zulu people whispered a chilling phrase: Mkabayi made kings. Mkabayi killed kings. After Shaka's bloody death, the Zulu throne was handed to Dingaan, the brother who had driven the spear of betrayal. But behind him, as always, loomed the unavoidable shadow of Mkabayi. Once again, she resumed her familiar role: advisor, architect, controlling hand. At first, it seemed her gamble had succeeded. The kingdom stabilized, the people no longer lived in frenzied terror, and crops returned to fields once abandoned. In the early years of Dingane's reign, Zulu seemed to awaken from a nightmare and breathe again. At nearly 70 years old, Mkabayi still proved herself the gatekeeper of the throne, someone no one dared underestimate. But the world outside was no longer the same. New enemies appeared, not neighboring tribes, but white settlers. The Voortrekkers bore migrants from the north. They brought muskets, gunpowder, and a burning ambition for land. Their conflict with the Zulu plunged the kingdom into violent, bloody wars, exposing weaknesses in Dingane's reign. Dingaan lacked Shaka's military genius and Mkabayi's cold strategic mind. He made fatal mistakes, crushing defeats in battle, broken treaties, mounting betrayals. Under his rule, the Zulu kingdom slowly lost the glory Shaka had built. And for the first time, even Mkabayi's guiding hand could not save it. In the royal court, she still held authority. But to many, her presence became a fearful shadow. They whispered of the kings who had died under her nod of consent. From Siguyana to Shaka to Mngana, the image of the guardian of the dynasty was slowly replaced by the witch of the throne. Rumors spread. She was not only the maker of kings, but also the bringer of blood and betrayal. The breaking point came in 1840. Dingaan, after a string of failures against both foreign enemies and internal rivals, was overthrown by his own brother Mpande with Boer support. Mpande ascended the throne, and for the first time in nearly 7 decades, Zulu had a king not chosen by Mkabayi. This meant one thing: she had lost power. To Mpande, Mkabayi was no longer a protector or advisor. She was the symbol of plots, betrayal, and blood. The younger men at court saw her as a ghost of the past, a blood-stained past they wished to cast away. And so, the woman who had made for kings and shaped the destiny of a nation was banished from the very kingdom she had built. Mkabayi died in exile around 1843, at over 90 years old. A lonely death, utterly opposite to her storm-filled life. No grand funeral, no songs of praise, only the silence of a bitter ending. Yet her legacy could not be erased. To this day, history still debates: was Mkabayi a traitor to her own blood, or a heroine who shattered the chains of patriarchy? She is praised as a pioneer of female power, a woman who refused marriage to keep her authority intact, who commanded armies and ruled politics in a man's world. But she is also cursed as a ruthless manipulator who used assassination as a tool of statecraft, leaving a trail of corpses in her wake. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Mkabayi's loyalty was never to individuals, but to the dynasty itself. She raised Shaka because he could build an empire. She agreed to his death when he threatened that empire. Everything was guided by a single principle: Zulu must survive. And therein lies her greatest tragedy. The woman born under an ill omen turned her entire life into a weapon for the dynasty, only to die cast out by the very line she protected. The Zulu have a saying: Mkabayi built the kingdom, and the kingdom erased her. That is the bitter epitaph for her near century of power and blood. When Mkabayi drew her last breath in exile, many thought her name would vanish, buried by the sands of time. Yet her shadow endures, haunting the pages of history, echoing in the stories passed by Zulu tongues. And the strange thing is, no one can agree whether she was a heroine or a traitor. For some, Mkabayi is the embodiment of cold cruelty. They point to the blood on the throne, Siguyana murdered, Shaka speared, Mangana purged. All bore her mark, if not her hand directly, then her silent consent. To them, she was the witch of the throne, who turned politics into a blood game and normalized assassination as policy. But for others, she was a torch in the darkness of patriarchy. Remember, in a society where women were destined only to be wives and mothers, Mkabayi shattered every chain. She ruled as a man, commanded as a general, and maneuvered as a strategist. She refused marriage to preserve her autonomy, an almost unheard-of choice in any culture of her time. To them, Mkabayi was a feminist icon before the term even existed. Perhaps the truth lies in the tension between these two images. For Mkabayi was never loyal to people, not her father, not her brother, not even Shaka, the nephew she had raised to greatness. She was loyal only to the Zulu. Every decision, no matter how bloody, was bound to one unshakable principle: the dynasty must endure. If Shaka was the weapon to forge an empire, she would place him on the throne. But when he became a threat, she would cast him aside to save the nation. It is this contradiction that makes her legacy so complex. She was both manipulator and savior, both nightmare and hope. For nearly a century, she created, protected, and destroyed for kings. Such a long and decisive influence is rare not only in African history but in the world. Today, when posterity remembers her, the question still lingers: was Mkabayi a heroine who defied patriarchy, or a bloodthirsty schemer cloaked in the mantle of dynasty protector? Perhaps there will never be a clear answer. But like all figures of great history, it is the very contradictions that turned her into legend. One thing is certain: without Mkabayi, there would be no Shaka. Without Shaka, there would be no legendary Zulu empire. Though cast out at life's end, Mkabayi left behind an indelible legacy, the legacy of a maker and destroyer of thrones, a woman born under an omen who dared to bend the fate of a nation. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for her is this: the maker of kings, the killer of kings, the guardian of Zulu.